Good evening, everyone. Read traditionally on this third Sunday of Lent this Gospel of the Samaritan woman. What I want to do today is to focus on one line from this Gospel, actually probably the shortest line of the Gospel. Right there at the beginning when Jesus is sitting at the well and he meets the woman. John, the evangelist of the Gospel, says that it was about noon. Why is this important? Why is it even mentioned? Noon, if you know anything about the period of time that the Gospel takes place in, was not a time that people went to gather water from the well. It's the worst time to do it, for a number of reasons. One is because it's noon. It's the middle of the day. It's so hot. And to be able to make the trek there, get the water and come back in the heat of the day, doesn't make any sense. You normally want to do it when it was much cooler. The second thing is, when you go to get water, you normally want to do it in the morning, so that you have water for the rest of the day, to wash your clothes, to clean, to cook with. So the question is, why was this woman at noon going to get the water from the well? The main reason is because she did not want to see anyone. Or we can conjecture that she didn't want anyone to see her. So she was doing it at a time that no one would be there, even if it was at a great inconvenience to her. And so, how or why did this woman do this? If we're going to understand, we've got to go a little bit further in the gospel, because Christ, of course, encounters the woman, and he begins this dialogue with her. He surprises her that he's there at the well. And the key for understanding why she wanted to go when no one else was there was whenever he brings up the discussion about her husbands. Her 5 previous husbands, and the current person she's shacking up with is not her husband. It leaves us to infer the fact that the reason the woman is going there when there's no one there in the middle of the day is because she's ashamed. She's ashamed of her behavior. She's embarrassed. She doesn't want others to see her. Because arguably in a small town like this, they know who she is. They talk about her. They gossip about her. And so she has this tremendous amount of shame. But what does Jesus do? He doesn't condemn her. He doesn't shame her. He doesn't ridicule her. In fact, he shows her tremendous patience, tremendous mercy, and compassion. And as a result, we see throughout the entire gospel, this leads to her healing and to her conversion, beginning to follow the gospel. Jesus leads the woman to deal with and face her shame. She has to confront it face to face in order for her life to be turned around and to be transformed. And that's the message I'd like to talk about today. And looking at this part of the gospel, that just like that woman who is so shameful of her sins and her lifestyle, Jesus wants us to face our own shame. He wants to put it in front of us, not to put us down, not to ridicule us, so that we can find healing and we can find deeper conversion. So what is shame? We can look at it from a number of different ways. And first of all, shame is something that we experience because of our sinful behavior. We do things, or we have done things, that we are ashamed of. And as a result of that shame, we tend to want to hide ourselves. We don't want others to see us, and we particularly don't want God to see us. And so if we look at the book of Genesis, chapter 3, remember when Adam and Eve eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. All of a sudden they realize they're naked, and the shame sets in, so they cover themselves and they hide themselves so that God cannot see them. Because of their sin, they're ashamed of what they have done, and ultimately we'll see ashamed of who they are. But the Lord sees them and seeks them out. In the same way, this woman, who is sort of like an Eve, is ashamed of what she's done. of the lifestyle that she has. But Jesus seeks her out and brings her to mercy, brings her to a deeper conversion and awareness of his compassion. The Lord wants to do the same with us. But he has to at first get us to face and admit our shame for the things that we have done. But the truth is, so often that shame runs much deeper than simple guilt for what we've done. Guilt is technically about sins we've committed. We are guilty for what we've done. But shame properly runs much deeper because of things that we have done, or even more because things that have been done to us. Things that we endured in our life, particularly in our childhood. Things that maybe we didn't receive, or we did receive, or were subjected to. We begin to be ashamed of who we are, not just of what we've done. We come to see ourselves as unloved or see ourselves as unlovable. We believe that God or someone else couldn't love us. We're ashamed of our very being. And it can run really, really deep. And that shame can cripple us, destroy our self-image, destroy our ability to love others or to receive love. It's crippling like a cancer. And so many people live with it. On a day-to-day basis, it grows and destroys their lives. But the scary thing is, as much as Jesus wants us to deal with that shame, particularly the deeper shame for who we are, to be able to face it, most of us are afraid to face it. We're afraid to face it. Because we feel like we're going to be judged. We feel like we're going to be condemned, that someone is going to look down on us. We don't want to admit that we're broken. We don't want to admit that we have that shame or these different faults. And as a result, we can do a number of different things, particularly if the shame is deep-seated, to avoid it. We can deny that we have any shame. We can deny that we have any sin. We don't talk to others about it. We say that we're perfectly okay. We can also cause drama. Because of that deep brokenness, we're going to have all this drama so that people notice our histrionic fits and all the other things that are done, so that we don't have to really face what we're dealing with. The deeper shame. Or we can deflect it. We can say, no, it's not my problem, it's your problem. You're the person who has the issue. These are devices, and I'm sure there are others, for us to not deal with and face the pain that we have in our lives. If I was dealing with this woman who had the 6 husbands, and again, I might approach it differently than others, but I would be the first to say, tell me about your shame, your background. Where did you come from? Was there any abuse in your background? Were your parents together or divorced? What happened? Because this type of sexual promiscuity, in my experience, is usually a sign of a much deeper problem, a much deeper shame. The self-hatred that sends this woman, and often can send other people, particularly in the area of sexuality, to go looking for love in all the wrong places, or to say, I'm not really loved or lovable, and allow people to abuse themselves or be abused by others. That clearly, from a psychological perspective, seems to be what's going on with this woman. And I see it all the time in people's lives, crippled by that deeper shame. They get into this self-destructive behavior because they've ultimately believed the lie that they are unloved or unlovable. And when they're challenged to face it, not out of condemnation, but even out of mercy, they're too afraid to do so. They're too broken. But it's so important that we do. And that's why the Lord wants to heal. He wants to transform and show the compassion. But in order for Him to heal us, we've got to admit we got a problem. We've got to be willing to take that shame and bring it to the light. The sin, and bring it to the light for the Lord to be able to heal it. We've got to let the Lord transform us, or else that shame will cripple us and destroy our relationships. But as I said, so often we fear allowing the Lord to do this in our lives. And so when Jesus does send people into our lives to show us love, to heal us, to transform us, whether it be a friend or a pastor or a counselor, we end up falling into one of those three things. We deny that we've got a problem. We cause drama to distract, or we deflect away and blame others. But we've got to face our problems. And the reason I'm talking about this today is because I see so much shame, so much pain in young people today, and college students with whom I work with, who, because particularly of things that have happened to them in the past, sexual abuse, physical abuse, verbal or emotional abuse, neglect, broken families, alcoholism, it doesn't matter what it is, big or small, it's convinced a lot of people that they're not good, that they're not lovable. And then many of them begin to act out, and as a result, the acting out of the sin just compounds the shame. And they're too afraid to face it. They're too afraid to deal with it. But here's the reality, and this comes from a purely psychological perspective. If we do not face it, particularly when we're younger, by the time you're 30, it's almost impossible to face. Not completely impossible, but almost impossible to face. Because the wound runs too deep. Because the shame is too great that we can't face it. And so as a result, what I've seen is people get older who don't deal with the shame, who can't bring it to Christ. Their lives are ruined, their relationships fall apart, they make others miserable, and they're lonely, sad, and depressed. It is a terrible, terrible thing. And that's why this message is so important for us today, particularly if we are young and we can recognize that shame in ourselves. Shame for sin that maybe we're living in, and more importantly, that shame of who we are, that we've allowed to take hold in our soul. Jesus wants to transform us. He wants to heal us. But in order to do so, like the woman of the gospel, we are going to have to face the shame. We're going to have to face the pain that comes along with it, or else we head down a path of destruction. And so that's my encouragement this Lent. It's a message of mercy and it's a message of compassion. Whatever else we choose to give up or whatever else we choose to do, if we realize, you know what, I've got a sin that I'm really ashamed of, that I don't want to talk to anybody about. Or we have some deeper wounds from things that have happened to us in the past that lead to a tremendous brokenness and a tremendous shame. Let's start dealing with our garbage. Let's start dealing with the baggage. Don't wait for it, because you are going to make your life and the life of others miserable. So that Jesus wants you to act now, a time of grace for that transformation. We could do it in several different ways. First and most important, when we realize our brokenness and the fear that comes to facing it, please make it your prayer, Lord, I know I've got to deal with this. I've got to give it to you. I've got to find the necessary help, whether it be confession or spiritual direction or counseling. Give me the courage to face it, to bring that shame to the light, to bring that sin to the light so that you can heal it and it can be transformed. Number 2, please pay attention to the many ways in our lives the Lord does try to heal us. He meets us in places that are often very unexpected. When we're hiding, He's seeking us out just like He did with this woman. But if the woman didn't recognize who Jesus was, that moment of grace would have passed by. In so many ways, particularly in people who do genuinely love us. Family members, friends, relationships, spouses, whoever it is, a priest, a sister. When we recognize that love, we realize that the Lord loves us even though we may not love ourselves. And then third and finally, please seek help from others. If you need counseling, go to counseling. If you need to go to confession, go to confession. If you simply need to talk to a friend about it, please do so. The worst thing is when we allow the shame to take hold, it eats us alive and we begin to believe the lie that we're not loved or unlovable. When we bring it to the light, when we seek the help that we need, that's when our lives can be transformed. And when we do face that shame and allow Jesus, particularly through others, to love us, to show us mercy, and we come to experience the same transformation, the same conversion the woman in the gospel does today, so that we break away from the shame, stop hiding, and willing to have the joy and the courage to go forth and spread the gospel. Amen.